What if I told you there's an anime character, one who literally embodies the sin of greed, who also happens to be one of the most selfless characters in his series? I might sound crazy, but I'm going to show how that's possible, how it's fitting thematically, and I'm going to do so a little bit differently. His story is going to be told through his relationships, because those are what define him. To start off, I'm going to lead with one that you may not have even known existed: his sister. She pulled a John Cena because I definitely did not see her, but the impacts of this relationship are far-reaching. You'll see all throughout the video the effects of it. First, it shows how brutal his upbringing was. She and Bon had to fend for themselves basically from day one, so stealing was a necessity for survival. And yet, it wasn't enough. His sister died of starvation at the age of 4. This was Bon's first major failure, leaving a hole inside him, and her death plays to both sides of the greed and love coin. Her death naturally made him more likely to go after the things he needed to keep himself alive, regardless of whether they were his or not, and he'd do anything to survive, hence the greed. So if he needed food, he'd steal it. Though it's hard to blame him too much knowing how horrible his life was. If he was beaten so badly he puked, which he was, he'd eat the puke. Another time, he was nearly trafficked, but escaped. This also made him appreciate the sanctity of life, creating not only a desire to extend his own, but to protect the ones important to him. That all started here, and both greed and love were furthered by the next relationship I want to get to: Zhivago. He's a complex case. He's the one that showed Bon that people could be kind, thus reinforcing the notion that they are worth cherishing. He introduced Bon to ale, which he grew to cherish, but he was also like 13, so that's not great. He told Bon about the Fountain of Youth, which is instrumental to his story. Zhivago became a father figure to him, but being a thief in his own right led to Bon doubling down on his greed. One of the most important moments of Bon's life, something that plays a huge role in molding who he is, and has a direct parallel to a decision he makes later on, is when Zhivago is forced to choose between Bon and his actual son. He chooses his own flesh and blood, leaving Bon beaten and abandoned, another hole left to fill. We'll get back to that in a bit. At this point, you're probably thinking, he doesn't sound all that greedy so far. Well, he is. If he wants something, he'll take it. His ability is literally called Snatch. No, not that. Sometimes what he wants is wholesome, and other times it's stealing toys from every child in a village, stealing clothes from strangers, or stealing powers from other sins while they're in the middle of a fight. Ironically, this thief actually has his own sacred treasure stolen from him. Having lived a life of pure misery, Bon decides to search for the Fountain of Youth. If he lives forever, maybe something good will happen someday. His journey takes him to the Fairy King Forest, where he finds the fountain and its guardian, Elaine. Each time Bon attempts to drink from the fountain, Elaine blasts him away. Eventually, his persistence leads to them speaking, and he explains his reasoning for seeking immortality. This resonates with her because, like Bon, she's lived a harsh life too. She's been alone for 700 years since her brother abandoned his duty as king. In fact, she's so miserable that she counters his thought process and says, "What if you gain immortality and nothing good ever happens?" The two relate, and he learns of her dream to leave the forest. He even offers to go find her brother, which leads to her embracing him. They spend more time together, and Bon gives up his dream of immortality because finally, he's found something more precious than his own life. It's not hard to see why these two fell for each other. Not only can they relate in their shared experiences, but they just haven't been close to that many people, so finding someone that understands and accepts you is extra meaningful. Of course, as soon as this happens, a demon arrives and attacks. Bon attempts to protect Elaine, and both are injured, but she had the same idea and drinks from the fountain, only to kiss Bon and deliver its contents to him. She dies, and Bon the Undead is born. Before I move on, let's get to the elephant in the room here. Bon likes him young looking. All I'll say is that I believe their connection works inside out as opposed to outside in. If you were deserted like Bon was, or like King did to Elaine, finding someone you connect with, someone who values you for you, that's going to go a long way. Or maybe that's Cope. It's probably Cope. To Bon, his life so far can be summed up in one sentence: everyone he likes leaves him. The loss of Elaine leaves another massive hole in him, and this one can't be filled. All he can do is find a way to bring her back. he develops a deep hatred for demons for taking her from him. He throws on the facade of a carefree attitude and keeps his distance from others. He's constantly drinking, which as an immortal doesn't impact him, but I think that's simultaneously self-destructive behavior and one of the few connections he has left with someone he loved. Ban is full of these types of contradictions. His story is a tragic one because basically it's one long tale of either making mistakes or going through disaster, paying for it dearly, and trying to make up for it. Which is why it's unexpectedly beautiful that the fox sin of greed has one of the biggest hearts in the show. Self-loathing is a constant theme in his story. This dude broods more than Batman. A lot of times, especially later in the series, he's used as a punching bag, practically that lets you show cool shots of carnage without any of the consequences. But thematically, it makes sense that a guy with deep-rooted insecurities about his value is always the one getting destroyed by putting himself in harm's way. It's almost his version of penance, and maybe it's just me, but I love how he and everything in this show is based on Arthurian legend. That brings us to Meliodas, one of my favorite friendships in all of anime. He frees Ban from prison and is interesting enough to get Ban to keep moving forward. When we see them reunite in the main series, they tease all this tension early on because Meliodas gave Ban his scar, something that happened due to Ban's greed, only for them to be schoolgirl giddy to see each other again and start playing patty cake. The mutual respect they have for each other is obvious, they're best friends, and Ban believes only Meliodas and Elaine accept him for who he is. They constantly banter, even on the brink of death. They are such a silly pairing and always a joy to watch. Also, the fact that Ban let himself be locked up for 5 years when he could have escaped, more self-loathing. I was already in on 7 Deadly Sins after episode 1, but what turned the series from good to great was Ban's introduction and the connections we saw between he, Elaine, and King. For as much as he makes fun of King, you can tell he cares about him. Ban knew King was Elaine's brother and didn't bother to correct him when he accused Ban of killing her. Part of that is because he legitimately believes her death is his fault because he failed to protect her, but another part of it was to spare King's feelings, probably because he views him as a brother. Also, in that arc, we get a callback to his sister. When they are all outside the necropolis, Ban lectures a boy for not making sure his sister is well fed, a mistake that he'll never live down. I'm going to pivot to the relationship with Jericho for a second, because theirs is far more complex than you'd think. She holds a deep contempt inside her from how her brother always put her down. This chip on her shoulder drives her to become who she is. When she meets Ban, he easily overcomes everything she throws at him, to the point he uses her attacks to shave. The embarrassment of being outclassed, but not belittled, pushes her further. Over time, she realizes she can never defeat him. When she's unwillingly turned into a demon, he's the one who saves her. Her inability to overcome him without being mistreated develops into a deep attraction. He's initially distant and treats her as an annoyance, but over time, he grows fond of her. However, the foundation of their relationship is unhealthy. He views her as a little sister, possibly an attempt to fill the hole of the one he lost, and her attraction to him stems from a rebellion against her brother. If you think about it, her eventual betrayal makes sense because the dynamics of their relationship were based on shaky ground. More than any other sin, his relationships stand out because they are all unique and fill different voids in his life. A lot of these are defined by the mistakes he's made. Thankfully, he's usually given opportunities to correct them, like his betrayal of Meliodas, and how he berates Hawk in the process. After Hawk's death, he's completely broken up about it, and once revived, he never talks to Hawk that way again, and even bonds well with his brother Wild. I'll be honest, outside of comedic effect, I don't know why Hawk was chosen, but he does fill the void of Ban needing someone to admire. Hell, he calls Hawk Master. The importance of the betrayal is something that needs more focus too. We know Ban's goal in life is to bring back Elaine. We also know he has a deep resentment towards demons. Then he's given an opportunity to bring her back shortly after learning Meliodas is a demon. It doesn't make it right to try and kill your best friend to bring your lover back, but you can understand why he did what he did. You can tell it pains him in the moment. When it doesn't succeed and they fight over it later, the issue is put to bed, at least in Meliodas' mind. But Ban? He holds on to that shame. When he reunites with Zhivago, we see a direct parallel between the two. Zhivago chose his son over Ban. Ban chose Elaine over Meliodas, and they both feel deep regret for it. Despite that, Ban never blamed Zhivago. while Meliodas never blamed Ban. What makes it touching is when Galland and Melascula have Ban cornered, it's Zhivago who makes the ultimate sacrifice, not death, but having his soul devoured to save Ban's. This time, he was there for him. So it's fitting when Meliodas is on the verge of death against the Ten Commandments, Ban has to choose between him and the recently resurrected Elaine. Again, he can save his friend, which will cause Elaine's reincarnation to end, or let his friend die and Elaine can stay. Like Zhivago, he chooses to rectify his prior mistake. And guess what? In typical Ban fashion, he fails and should have lost both. When Meliodas comes back, I do like the detail that Ban is the one who acknowledges something is different about him, showing how close they are. The guilt of betraying and failing Meliodas lingers, but thankfully another opportunity presents itself. Meliodas' emotions are sent to purgatory. Ban goes after him, where he searches for Meliodas for 1,000 years until he finds him. Finally, Ban has repaid his debt, and they manage to escape, but only after he learns something incredibly valuable. Instead of using his abilities to steal, he learns how to use them to give. When he returns, he joins Elaine and the others to take part in the Holy War. She exhausts her energy and collapses. Out of power, her temporary life is set to vanish, and again, she dies in Ban's arms. But this time, he's prepared. He will not lose another person he loves again. Here, he gets an opportunity to use what he learned in Purgatory. So the Foxen of Greed, a man who lived a life stealing from others, ends up giving his immortality to the woman he loves. This makes his later fight against the Demon King way cooler too, because he's immortal now and he can't continue to fight in the same self-sacrificing way. For the first time, he has to protect himself because he has people to live for. That's why he's the most selfless grifter in anime. With that, I'm out.